Up next is a special presentation from Walt Disney Imagineering with How Disney is Changing the Future of Storytelling. Please welcome Tanner J. Rinke, Show Mechanical Engineer Principal, and Stephen C. Gregory, Animation Creative Director.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Tanner Rinke. I'm a mechanical engineer with Walt Disney Imagineering. I've been with the company 11 years, focusing mostly on audio animatronic figures.
And I'm Stephen Gregory. I've been with Walt Disney Imagineering as the Animation Creative Director for the last 4 years. Previous to that, I spent 18 years at Pixar, working in the film division and eventually collaborating with WDI Imagineering. One of the things that inspired me to make that transition to Imagineering was I truly believe that the technology state of the audio animatronics is in a renaissance, and we are just at the beginning of what type of stories we can tell moving forward. So from that, basically in 1981, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston published this book, Disney's Animation, The Illusion of Life. It's the most complete book ever written about the development of Disney character animation techniques and technology that's ever been published, right? But however, the book isn't just about technique or technology. The book is actually about getting down to the heart and the emotion and the engagement with an audience and bringing characters to life. And I think it's summed up in this phrase from the preface of the book. There's a special ingredient in our type of animation that produces drawings that appear to think and make decisions and act on their own volition. It is what creates the illusion of life. This illusion of life enchants audiences with the appeal and emotion of character, letting them forget that they're not only viewing a sequence of drawings, but allows them to engage with those characters and take this emotional journey through story. This is the defining element of Disney animation, right? In 1963, Walt Disney, along with some of the artists from the Disney studios, set out to recreate this illusion of life in a dimensional environment with the opening of the Enchanted Tiki Room at Disneyland, right? Thus bringing the knowledge of storytelling and character development from the animation studios from the silver screen into the real world. Although these two art forms differ in many ways, they share a common goal, which is to transcend the process that is used to create them and basically embody these characters with the essence of life. Where we find ourselves now is this really interesting place where technology has gotten us to a place where these two very different art forms at the beginning of kind of their existence to now has started to blend these two processes together. So we're kind of in a place now where the tools that we use to animate audio animatronics and tell those stories are the same tools that we use to develop feature films and tell those stories. And what the really powerful thing that it allows us to do is bring, again, just like they did in 1963, these artists back together to collaborate in a common language that allows them to progress this into the future. So for instance, we can have animators from Walt Disney Feature Animation Studios animate in their own tool sets, and that animation pipes onto our animated figures that live in our attractions today. Sorry, my confidence slide went away. So one of the things that's really interesting is that we all know that all the technology in the world isn't going to save us from a bad story, right? And ultimately, fundamentally, storytelling over the years hasn't really changed, right? Good storytelling is good storytelling, and how we tell stories is essentially the same as it's been since the beginning of time. But one of the things that's really interesting is that the evolution of our audio animatronic technology today is allowing us to tell much different stories in a much different way than we've probably ever been able to tell before. And with that, I'm handing off to Tanner.
Thank you. So what are some of the ways that Disney is evolving audio animatronic technology to tell these stories, like being able to bring the Hondo character to life that we'll see here that's coming to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge soon? If you look at across the board at all the scope of technology development we're doing at Disney and seeing in the industry, A lot of it can be categorized into one or two categories. One category is process technology, so the technology involved with the process of developing these characters. And the other category is the product technology, or the technology that's embedded within the figures themselves, or the infrastructure behind the figures. So what we're going to try to do is talk about what we mean by the process technology and a couple of examples of that, and then go through a couple of recent figure technology examples, and then we'll end with a brief look ahead of where we think this is headed. So what do we mean by the process? In the last several decades, the process by which we have developed our animatronic or audio animatronic figures at Disney has been relatively unchanged. And it looks something like this, where it always starts with a character vision, or a creative vision of what this character, its size, its form, the motions it needs to play to play its role within the story context. And then from that flows a fairly linear process, from sculpting to fabricating to building and costuming, until finally we get to this last step where we bring in programmers and creative animators like Steven to find out for the first time, can we bring this thing to life? Does this technological machine do what we initially envisioned at the beginning?
And one of the things that's really interesting about this process that we really fought to change was that while it's relatively linear, it was also very siloed because of the different types of disciplines and the artistic needs of those disciplines, which is one of the things we've been changing as well.
So what if we could, what's usually a long baking in the oven process, and you only get a taste of that illusion of life towards the end, what if we could bring that taste earlier in the process? Well, some of the recent advances in technology is allowing us to do that. So that's things like bringing the digital animation techniques from the film world or robotics techniques from industry into our process. Now it looks a little more like this, which looks pretty messy, and it is.
It is.
It's a little chaotic, but I think that's a good thing. It's almost like being able to sketch together and make real trade-offs and changes early on between the creative and technical teams, so we can see if we're on course to get to that illusion of life that we originally envisioned.
Yeah, the real powerful thing in that process is it allows for iteration in our own tool sets so that we can talk in a common language together to share ideas and collaborate. Tanner can come back to me and give me restrictions, and I can take that into my tool set and understand what that means to the performance and the life that we're trying to create in a character. And then we can come together with creative solutions of how to solve those problems so that we still tell the story in the best way, but also meet the requirements of that figure.
So that's what it looks like in general. Here's a couple of examples of new process technology. So for example, the real-time visualization tools, or VR, we're able to visualize what an attraction looks like far in advance of building the first piece of it. And in the context of characters, we can look at the timing and the staging and the motions of those characters so that they can fit in with the guest experience.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. And that's a huge advancement, right? It seems trivial, but in the past, we would design a character to do something without necessarily being able to understand how that plays within the context of the overall story of the attraction. And now we can kind of visualize that ahead of time to know that we're making the right choices to make the right story points at the right point in the attraction, which is huge.
Yeah, and then as that flows down into the figure design itself, we remember from Radiator Springs Racers at Disney's California Adventure across the street, when we first started looking at how to animate Mater and make him feel like the same character you saw in the films. We worked with Pixar animators, Steven at the time when he was at Pixar, and it was actually quite new to us to be able to see a three-dimensional or a 3D graphical asset and how the Mater figure moved in the film. How did the tires move? We had discussions about how the tires move with the cab, and how the mouth moves, or what mouth expressions are unique to Mater, and that really was able to inform our design up front.
He brings up tires, but it really was many conversations about tires. And the interesting thing about these guys is that the tires can't actually roll on the ground, but the tires pivot from the ground, and that was like this really difficult thing or concept to get, and then trying to find a solution that still allowed him to drive back and forth while maintaining that illusion, which is truly important to who the Cars characters are, was a big achievement, right? And using these tools and technology really helped us solve those problems.
So that's an example of some new digital process tools. Here's a quick clip of some new robotics product. These are Vilu critters that you can find over across the street again at Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout. These characters look pretty simple and cute, but they have some sensing technology and algorithms that let them perceive what the guests are up to and respond to facial expressions, gestures, and effectively blend an infinite number of animations into an endless show that's unique to the guests that are there that day. So this is us looking to adopt more robotics technology to engage with our guests more. So let's take a deeper dive into another example of both process and product technology used in the Navi Shaman figure, which opened up 2 years ago at the Pandora World of Avatar in Florida. When Walt Disney Imagineers started looking at how we could deliver a Navi character, we worked with the filmmakers of the Avatar films, and it was apparent at the beginning that this was going to be a unique challenge, both because of the photorealism and the sort of the highly expressive nature of these Navi creatures. So we started with the head. The face is often the most common focal point that makes or breaks the illusion of life and whether a character would be believable. And we've actually brought a prototype, one of the early prototypes of the head. The first step in the process, again with our new digital process, we're able to use animation data from the film. So used in the Avatar film, we could study facial geometry. We could actually look at individual points in various areas of the face and study how to move those functionally in the way that could drive those expressions in the film. And this really was a helpful step early in the process to get notes from the creative team and say, yeah, that's the expression we need, and this is what's going to make it believable. And at the end of it, it culminated in 3 times as many functions as we had put in our heads prior to that. So let's take a quick look at what this looks like in the full figure. This is just the mechanics behind the figure, but now we need to develop skins and technology to be able to stretch those skins into the various expressions to make this a photorealistic, believable character. And here you'll see it for the first time with skin on. Now, what about the body? We have a believable head. How do we make the rest of the body believable? These are long, slender characters known for their cat-like movements and dynamic expressions. So part of that early prototyping process, we worked with the creative team to develop new custom motors that could achieve this level of performance, this level of grace. We had to build those, cycle those, and then review the motions with the creative team. And a key part of this new process was motion capture. How do we, at an early stage, look at what kind of animation we could drive on this type of robotic equipment? So we brought mocap actors into the space and had live direction and redirection of what kind of moves might work on the figure and play well. And this culminated in the first prototype where we, just with bare metal, no costume, very little skin, we were able to put these pieces together and start iterating on what could actually work in the scene. And I remember this day, we brought the same mocap actress to our studio when we first played her animation on this figure. And I remember looking over after she watched this and she was in tears. And I probably said the wrong thing. I think I said, like, what are you crying? This is just a machine or something. And she said, what this team is doing is so beautiful. It was like seeing herself in a mirror on a machine. And that's when we realized what we were doing was something really special, where we were able to take this creative direction and this illusion of life and put it onto metal. And we really believed it was going to carry all the way to the field. So for those who haven't seen it, this is a look at the Navi Shaman figure as she is playing in the Navi River Journey attraction in Florida. And you can see in support of that same photorealistic story that everything from the costume to the skin and the makeup, even her interaction with the scenic elements and how precisely she interacts with that all drove the technology, both in the process and the figure technology to bring that to life. All right. So what's next? What we want to do is give a couple of, there's a lot of opportunity coming up with using this new technology. A couple of areas that we as an industry, I can even see from previous presentations and also what we're looking at Disney is how do we interact more with the guests, or how do we engage more with them? So a couple of highlights of ways that we're heading in directions to both get out of the attraction and more into the park and activate the lands more. That's one direction we're heading. And another direction is to imbue more intelligence into our character. So let's take a look at one example where we're both getting out into the land and putting more intelligence into the character. This is our mobile autonomous character platform, which we call Jake around Disney. These are just early play tests of how can we build a system that can perceive its environment, move in and amongst guests, and engage with them in new ways. And this has been play tested at Tomorrowland at Disneyland, and we see a bright future for what this type of animatronics technology can afford us. And speaking of getting out into the land and beyond our attractions, here's another example you may have seen online recently of some Stuntronics work where we're developing an untethered aerial autonomous Acrobat that can perform some dynamic moves. So here we go.
That's good.
All right, so those were just a few examples of the diverse amount of animatronics technology that's going on in our industry and at Disney. I think in general, one of the analogies that speaks to me most is if you consider what the 3D computer graphics technology meant to the digital or to the film world of animation, and how much it didn't necessarily change storytelling, but it did allow animators to have a lot more nuance and believability in what they were doing. The same thing is happening right now with robotics technology and digital processes applied to our audio animatronics. It's allowing for much richer, more nuanced, and believable illusions of life.
Yeah, and I think a really great example of that is the shaman figure. Just the video where she first comes to life with her skin, and you see that subtle nuance of the blinking and the eyes looking around. And I remember back, starting at Pixar on Toy Story, and that was one of the first things that was kind of the big difference in computer animation at the time, was that it gave you that subtlety and nuance that you could know that you couldn't actually do in traditional animation, right? Because you had the limitation of this pencil width. So to do subtle movements and subtle acting was very difficult, but the computer allowed and enabled that type of acting and emotional engagement that we hadn't had before. And I think that's also now starting to transcend into audio animatronics, and I think that's a really good example of that. And I think all the stuff that we're showing just shows that there's a really bright future, right? This is just the beginning. There's so many cool things that we can do with all this technology, and so many awesome stories and experiences that we can create for our guests. So it's going to be awesome.
All right, I think that's all we have.
Thank you, Tanner and Gregory. We have a minute or two for questions. We're good on time if there's any questions from the house.
No questions. Oh, there's a question. Oh, no.
Yes.
You want to sit?
All right, thanks guys, incredible. Can you talk about what is the thing that is driving the technology forward, or what are the changes that will allow you to keep going further and further? Is it changes in microprocessing? Is it materials? What is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely all across the board, depending on which aspect we're looking at. Where technology is changing in mechanical, electrical, skins, the process. I would say, at least from my perspective, the robotics and digital animation processes are the keynotes here. The idea that the robotics industry is really flourishing right now, and many other spaces, even beyond themed entertainment. We're able to adopt and leverage a lot of that and pull that into our world.
Yeah, and I think it's the same thing, right? That the ability to use a common animation tool set to animate animatronics as you do films and effects allows us to tap into a larger, group of animators in the world that can access this technology. So we can tap into a larger group and allow them to tell the stories that maybe they couldn't before because they didn't have access to this technology, because there was a barrier in the tool set. And I think that's, from a creative point of view, is really empowering. But that's kind of my point of view. I really do think that putting technology in the hands of creatives is a powerful thing, right? I can't do my job without Tanner, and Tanner can't do his job without me. And together, that's a great team. And when you find the right people, you can make some really amazing magic with that. And, yeah.
One more question in the back.
Hey there. I'm going to ask you guys to talk a little bit about your work with your third partner, the operationals team. A lot of us in creative have had these big dreams and had them shot out of the water. And I know that you've managed to deliver a lot of this. Can you talk about how you brought them into the process?
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, I think maybe very similar to the plot we showed of the chaos of bringing things up front. By prototyping and pushing some of the process early, we're able to bring in our operations partners, maintenance partners, and they, in the case of Navi Shaman as an example, they were able to give real feedback up front about, hey, this is a great illusion of life, but how can we maintain that illusion of life so that it's the same day one as the guests that'll see it 5 years later? The same types of tools, we're able to bring them in early and get their feedback.
Yeah, and as an animator, right, a lot of the tools that we have and a lot of my responsibility is understanding the limitations of the product that's being produced by the engineering team and creating a performance that not only delivers the point of the story or the emotional arc that we're trying to tell for that particular scene, but doing it in a way that doesn't violate the limitations or the requirements of that figure, right? In the past, it was much more difficult to understand those things, but in this new environment, I have direct access to if I'm causing problems or not, and I can make different creative choices to still tell the same story and deliver something that is safe for the robot and hopefully allows it to be maintainable and runnable.
Okay, I think that's our time. Gregory Stevens, Tanner Rinke, Walt Disney Imagineering. Thank you so much.